I'm Dana Perino, and this is Perino on Politics. And with just 3 weeks until Election Day, who are the voters that still need to be convinced? Joining me back on the podcast today is Republican strategist and Executive Vice President at Targeted Victory, Matt Gorman. We also might be joined by another friend. We'll see if that works out, and if so, I will introduce him then. Welcome to Perino on Politics, where I call up my smart friends, find out what's on their minds about the state of American politics. So, Matt, there's a lot to get to here. Maybe we should explain to people a little bit of your background so that they know why, one, we're friends.
Yes, we are.
That's true. And I hope your mom is listening. Hi, Carrie.
Yeah. She will be.
But you and I first met when we were talking about House races back in 2017, 2018.
Yeah, exactly.
And we've been friends ever since. I know that you worked on the Romney campaign. You were with Tim Scott on his presidential bid this past time around. And you also do corporate clients and things like that.
Yeah.
So right now, as you look at this race, we are 3 weeks to go. I guess you could say, to me, it feels like the race is tied with Trump having a bit of an edge and some momentum. Is that right?
I think you're right. The momentum is clearly breaking Trump's way. What Harris has seemed to rely on are these little bumps surrounding moments, right? When she takes the ticket mantle from Joe Biden, gets a really good bump after that. And then after the convention, bump after that. And then a debate. The problem with her right now is there's no massive kind of convening event that will give her that built-in bump. And what we've seen is things have been steadily trending towards Trump. I mean, the NBC News poll that came out yesterday has them tied after being the previous month. Harris was up 5. And you're seeing a tightening in the states, but what it also has really become pronounced is the gender gap, not just among women and Republicans. We've talked a lot about that, but among men and Democrats. And so you're seeing a scramble with Harris. And there's a strategy change on a lot of different areas. You're not seeing much of the housing plan anymore. She's talking very much more of an anti-Trump message. She's going out there more in media. Clearly, she sees the polls internally, what we're seeing publicly, too. And
we are going to introduce Antoine Seawright. He is here, and he is a good friend of ours, and he is the CEO of Blueprint Strategy and a great friend. Antoine, thanks for being here. It looks like you're on the road. You're a road warrior today.
Oh, my goodness. What a time to be alive, in the words of that modern-day hip-hop philosopher, Drake.
It's good to have you, and you suited up, and I appreciate that, as always. Of course, I would take you any way that you came. So we were just getting started, Antoine, just to talk about overall feeling about the race. I had said that it's certainly, if you look at the polls, it's tied, and it does feel like just with a little bit of momentum on Trump's side, but we're talking about some of the big moments in the campaign, the debate, the convention. But, way back when, and I know it's much more sophisticated now, but when I was a kid and we had Atari and we got the Donkey Kong game. Okay, so Mario, he would go up the ladder, right? And then he would go across, and then you had to go up again. You had to jump again. And then that's how you got to the top. And I feel like with Harris, in a way, if she were Mario, right, she goes up a level, and then she stays on that level and sort of levels off, and then she has to go back up to that level again and comes off. But at the same time, she's raised $1 billion. So it's been just a fascinating election on so many levels. Antoine, your overall thoughts on where things are right now?
Look, I think it's going to be a 50-50 jump ball. I think there's some things that ultimately matter in the end that will decide the outcome of the election, not just at the top, but down through the entire ticket, if you will. I think organization is going to matter. Candidate quality is going to matter. I certainly believe that money plays a extremely important role as you try to articulate your message towards the end. But the other piece that I think that's so often overlooked in modern day American politics is the simple fact of coalitions and constituencies. Every election presents an opportunity to define the election by simply who shows out to vote. I think it's a map and a math game with this election because the stakes are so high and because what was once uncertain ground for Democrats has all of a sudden become fertile ground. And so this polar coaster that we find ourselves on over the course of this election cycle has proven that you can be up today, down tomorrow. But the one thing has been consistent is that the person or the candidate who's been able to unify and solidify their base has been the one that I think has the leg up going into the election.
Let me have you expand a little bit, and then I'll get Matt's take about the money at this point, because she certainly has raised a lot, and there's a lot of ads to be done. I take your point on the organization in terms of how many people do we have out there knocking on doors, making sure people are going to vote. But at some point, is there a law of diminishing returns about the ads, or do you disagree with that?
Oh, I disagree with that, because the one thing we're having to battle with as Democrats in this election is the oversaturation towards certain constituencies with what I would describe as misinformation, disinformation. Down south, we call it lies. And so if you think about Black men and the fact that they are purposely being targeted, same with Latino men, by a lot of the disinformation and misinformation from Republicans and other bad actors who want to influence American elections, I think we have to block and tackle. We have to block that part out and tackle the reality that these constituencies matter and that issues are not necessarily everyday top of mind, whether it's in the media or on any policy platform given for the candidates to speak directly to.
So, Antoine, before I go to Matt, can you just tell me, can you give me an example of what you think is either mis or disinformation from your point of view that's being targeted to Black men?
Yeah, I mean, one example I hear as I'm traveling the country, in fact, I heard it last night at an event that I was at, is that Donald Trump gave us checks. Well, it was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris that gave the $1,400 stimulus checks that most people speak to when they talk about the stimulus checks during the pandemic. That's just one relevant example. And part of the frustration is I don't think President Biden and Vice President Harris took credit for what they were able to do to help rescue and rehab the economy after a once-in-a-century global pandemic.
All right, Matt, let me get your take on money overall at this point in the campaign, and if you want to touch base on that.
Yeah, look, I mean, money matters. It certainly does. You'd rather have more than less, absolutely. But it's funny, it's an inverse, right? Where House campaigns, Senate campaigns, money plays an extraordinary role because it's so much of it's done through paid advertising. You get at a presidential level, you certainly want more money than not, but for example, what's the one killer ad after 10 years in the scene, everybody knows Donald Trump, that you're finally going to run that's going to win this for you? There really isn't one, right? So that we often have as Democrats, you saw this with Hillary in 16, you also saw this in 2008. Democrats tend to have more money at the end if they know what to do with. And if remember, Obama he blocked out 30 minutes on every broadcast network right before the election and just ran an infomercial for 30 minutes because they had more money they know what to do with. So look, I think the important part is earned media and presidential is so key.
Tell people, since we do a 30,000 level podcast, so tell people what earned media is.
Earned media is the press, dealing with the press, giving interviews. It's essentially dealing with the media, but it's not running paid advertisement. No, it's not television ads, radio ads, digital ads. It's giving interviews like this, talking to, say 60 Minutes or the nightly news or local media too. It is something that you're not paying for, but dealing with the media there.
Dana, can I just add one thing to that? The way we consume information in 2024 is different than the way we consumed it in 2020 and even 2016.
Or, I mean, if you think about, for me, Antoine, I didn't even have a Twitter or a Facebook account when I ended in January of 2009 at the White House.
Wow.
Well, and where we're getting our information is different, and how fast we're getting information has certainly changed the game. We live in now a 24-hour news cycle. So whether it's a podcast, whether it's a radio show, or whether it's the traditional measures that Matt just mentioned, I think everyone gets their information different. So the traditional cable news shows and so forth, that game has changed a bit. While some consume there, many do not.
And also, look, running for president in this day and age, it's a content creation game. You are creating content every step of the way, and you're filling a vacuum, because if you don't fill it, your opponents will. And so you're constantly pushing out, whether it's, again, through podcasts like this or just through your own thing, right? You need to constantly be filling an information vacuum that your supporters, people that are open to voting for you, they need to be able to consume things about you, learn about you, be persuaded by you, because if you don't, you best believe your opponent is doing it.
Remember this, we now live in an age where influencers, ambassadors, messengers for the message carry just as much weight as the candidate once did in an election like this. And so some people would much rather hear from XYZ person with a blue check mark on social media and having them explain why they're supporting XYZ candidate versus the candidate themselves, because different people trust different measures and different ways that they consume and digest their information.
One of the things, Antoine, I did want to ask you both about is the push about black male voters, because we had Barack Obama come out and give a speech last week. One of the things he said is, because guys, you have to get out there and vote, and you shouldn't be afraid to vote for a woman. Or like, is that your problem? Is that your hang up? I'm paraphrasing here. And there's been some criticism of that, Antoine, of that it was like hit the wrong note. But I mean, what do I know? What do you think?
Well, I disagree with the pushback. Look, I think Barack Obama was trying to be helpful to the cause, because for many people, the misogyny piece is a real thing. And I think that the one thing Kamala Harris represents, she looks like most of our mothers and grandmothers, aunts and sisters, et cetera. So I don't think that I would not take his words as talking down to people. I think he was trying to talk to black men and say, hey, these are the stakes. This is what this means. But also, I think my party has to be careful of dismissing the feelings of any constituency, in particular black men, when we know that black men will be a consequential and decisive voting bloc in this election. I think both of you remember in the 2016 election where 13% of black men voted for Donald Trump. And some people look at that as a vote against Hillary Clinton, and that is part of the equation why some people feel we lost the 2016 election. Not saying that that's all the way true, but that's part of it.
Look, it's broader. I think it's white men too, right? They do not know how to talk to men. Like you said, again, the NBC News poll I was referencing before, they're losing men by 16 and we're losing women by 15. Really, this election is going to come down to, if we win men by more than we lose women, we'll win. And the opposite holds true for Democrats in a lot of respects. It's going to come down to that gender gap, which one can shrink it to their deficiency the most. And I mean, again, you talk about influencers. Antoine's right. You have I saw one over on Twitter. He was very well kind of known in Biden world, talking about Tim Walz, quote, teaching football. And it's like, you don't know how to talk to men. And they had that kind of that tone deaf ad that made the rounds on social media, talking about, I'm man enough to vote for a woman, or I'm man enough to, they don't know how to talk to men and really appeal to them on their own.
So it's interesting because there is also a push from President Trump to talk to women, and he's going to do a town hall with all women voters with Harris Faulkner as the moderator this week. In addition to that, I would commend, how like on a podcast, you always have to recommend another podcast. It's almost mandatory. I did listen to something last week that I would commend the two of you and everybody listening. And it was Derek Thompson has a podcast called Plain English. And I listened to it on Friday. It was about men and voting, and just over the 30 to 40 years, how things have eroded for men in their minds and how they're thinking about things. And it was very, very interesting. They didn't necessarily break it down just between white men and black men. It was just men overall. And I commend that to everybody to pay a little bit of attention for that. Before we go to the next segment, I'm going to give you each a chance to say, why do you think, I'll ask Matt to talk about Trump and Antoine to talk about Kamala Harris. What's your best case scenario right now for the campaigns? I'll start with you, Antoine.
My best case scenario for the campaign is that we solidify our base, that we overperform the early vote numbers and supersede what we did in 2016 and 2020. And because this will be a base plus election, independent thinkers, independent voters, and non-traditional Democratic-leaning voters will show up early and show up in the 7 states that will ultimately decide the direction of the election, and that we just don't stop at the presidential level, because the chance to win the Senate and the House matters just as much.
Okay.
I mean, look, I think what you're seeing right now is, Donald Trump's not going to Coachella, California and doing a rally at Madison Square Garden here in New York City just because he, feels like it. They're not in play at a presidential level, but they're the two most competitive states, California and New York, at a House level. And so you're seeing a big push from Republicans, and I think Democrats too, to an extent, on their side, to bring some of these House candidates along. We feel good about the Senate, particularly with Montana really solidifying in our direction. But do we pull someone over like a McCormick in Pennsylvania or a Hovde in Wisconsin? Hearing kind of late push rumors about that. So obviously the presidency, but can you get maybe a 52, 50, even 3 seat majority with the right Trump victory? And if you get those numbers, the House is going to come in line too.
All right.
DP,
go ahead.
DP, can I just remind these extraordinary listeners and both of you that there are 10 states in the country that will have reproductive freedom and reproductive justice on the ballot. That's going to drive a certain kind of turnout that we would not ordinarily have or expect in a presidential election. So there's one thing to keep our eye on as we lean in closer towards Election Day. I
remember asking Jim Messina after 2022 because Democrats did fairly well on the reproductive front on that. And I said, wherever the states were that they had it on the ballot that year. And I said, do you plan to do that in 2024 at the presidential level in certain states? And he said, if I have anything to do with that election, it will be that. I said last week, was it here or somewhere else? I said that there might be a shy Kamala voter, right? They talked about shy Trump voters before. And my friend from Fox and Friends, Lawrence Jones, sent me a note. He goes, what do you mean by that? And I just wrote back, I'm like, the issue of reproductive rights and abortion. And it could be that some people just don't want to talk about it, but it means enough to them that they're going to vote that way. Now, everything that we have that's like evidence is that the economy is driving the conversation over and above everything else. But if you're talking about close elections in states, especially where Antoine mentions those 10 that have it on the ballot, we will see how that turns out. That will be interesting to watch. Okay, we'll have more Perino on politics coming right up. And we are back with Perino on politics. We have the last 3 weeks of the campaigning. And can I just ask you guys, we've been doing this podcast for a while, every week for a month. Now we got 3 weeks left. Is there anything that either of them can do between now and the actual voting day that will make a big difference? Matt.
In theory, yes, right? Some massive gaffe, some surprise that has outsized events. Because look, what we're normally used to is, we obviously had the last debate, which is really the last convening thing on October 1st, the vice presidential debate. Usually that's the presidential debate, and that's usually about 10 days before Election Day, like October 24th, 25th. So there's a large vacuum of time now that we're right in the middle where outside events can intrude. Is it, war in the Middle East? That for a while it could have been the longshoreman strike. Do outside events intervene and push one towards one candidate or the other based on their strengths, right? The economy or, immigration or abortion, whatever. That can always happen. And look, I think also you are constantly trying to turn out your own voters. Antoine mentioned, right, we are in the middle of voting right now. So how are you juicing turnout, say, in Pennsylvania right now? Every campaign operative in that state is looking at their returns this morning. How do we do on absentee early vote returns over the weekend? What do you need to juice it in this part of the state, that part of the state? So you're in a very different era of politics than it was 20 years ago, where you were flying blind until this first Tuesday after the first Monday.
Antoine.
Dan, I think that we should all be very clear that the expectations for former President Trump and Vice President Harris are different. He can do whatever he wants, and I don't think his base will move away from him because I think they're solidified, they're locked in.
Right, and you make a good point because his numbers have been pretty steady all along, and the fluctuations have come from Democrats and certainly gone way up since Biden dropped out for Democrats.
Yeah, so I think that's one thing. But the other thing, I think the biggest mistake any candidate can do in politics, and I've been doing elections since 2004 from the presidency to the precinct, is to take any constituency for granted. We, I think, as Democrats, made the mistake and made assumptions about the electorate in 2016, and we lost in places we should have won. We lost constituencies, or we had erosion with constituencies that should have been a natural ally and partner. So I think that we have to run through the tape, but we have to treat every single constituency and every particular battleground as an investment, not an expense. And then the other thing, if we do not go anywhere or do not go everywhere, we cannot make the assumption that we will be able to gain over everyone.
My friend yesterday, a different friend, not Lawrence Jones, said that he believes that Virginia could go Trump's way. I said, interesting. I mean, you know what my answer is to all these people? We'll see, because I don't know. But Virginia, a possibility for Republicans?
If Virginia's going Republican, then we're having a damn good night, right? Virginia's not going to be, the 271st electoral vote, right? That's going to be the, hitting 300 plus.
I see. Okay.
I just would be shocked. Mark Warner almost lost to our good buddy Ed Gillespie back in 2014, but that was a sneaky race. That was on no one's radar. They didn't have the chance to really mobilize Democrats.
I said it.
Yeah?
I'm the only one who said he's going to win. Yes, you can go back, roll the tape. Just kidding.
That might be a bridge too far.
Is there any state that you think that the Democrats might win that would be a surprise, Antoine?
I think you have to pay attention to what happens in Florida because of reproductive freedom, reproductive justice being on the ballot. I'm paying a little closer to Ohio, not from a presidential perspective necessarily, but because it's a battleground for a consequential Senate race.
Indeed.
And then, I have to add this because I'm a Carolina boy. North Carolina is literally a presidential toss-up.
And what do you think the Hurricane Helene's aftermath in North Carolina, does that affect the race one way or the other? And not just how people feel about who they want to vote for, but just logistically getting people the ability to vote?
In a weird way, yes, because the areas that have been predominantly hit or impacted by the hurricane are traditional Republican strongholds, with the exception of Asheville. And so most of those precincts and most of the areas where the storm has been impacted has been Republican. So I think that they will become, or that area of the state will probably lean more independent thinking than traditional participation and just voting Republican, because they understand the rebuild and the rehab to a sense of normalcy will all depend on who's the president of the United States and what the Congress looks like.
Fascinating. All right, we'll be right back with a little bit more of Perino on Politics. And we're back for segment 3 of Perino on Politics, and this is where I ask my smart friends, in the last 22 days of an election, what do you pay attention to that I might be missing? You guys are much more experienced campaigners than I am. So I'll just turn it over to you, Matt, first, and then Antoine.
No, I'm looking at the Senate, right? For example, if you're seeing Hovde or McCormick be competitive in those battleground states, and both parties are seeing that by their actions and their polls, how they talk publicly, that's telling me that these are closer to presidential level as well. I just fail to see any way that McCormick wins and Trump doesn't, and probably close with Hovde as well. So what that's telling me is not only is the top, the kind of middle of the ticket in the Senate solidifying, but what does that mean for the top of the ticket? Trump is probably in a stronger position in those states. I've been very surprised in the optimism over the last month about Republicans in Pennsylvania. You see the Senate is moving a little bit towards our way. We feel a little better than we did, say, a month ago in that state. And that is really the big prize in election night. So goes Pennsylvania is going to tell us so much about that night.
Antoine?
I'm looking at the early vote numbers because for us, they are a must, not a plus. And I think they're going to matter, in particular in some of the rural parts of Pennsylvania, Michigan. So I'm looking at early vote numbers.
How do they look so far?
So far, so good. However, I have to caution my party. We've seen large surges in early voting, and we've seen Republicans outperform on election day. So certainly paying attention to early vote numbers, certainly paying attention to how well we use our on-the-ground infrastructure. I think I may have said this on your program, Dana. This election will be a combination of high tech and high touch. And so whomever can, I think, put those two things together will ultimately come out to be successful. And then I think the thing that the world is looking at is how independent thinkers and independent voters break and how quickly they break towards each one particular candidate or party or the other. That's going to have a say-so, and not just the top of the ticket, but on down the ticket.
I love having you guys on, and I want to end with one question for you both, because I'm curious, where will you be election night? Do you know what you're doing yet, Antoine?
I will probably be somewhere watching the returns, if not on your show, Dana. Shameless plug. No, I'll probably be somewhere in the war room looking at numbers.
You prefer to be in a big group rather than by yourself crunching numbers?
Yeah, after I finish yoga, yes.
Okay, I know he's big. He's a big workout guy. Yes, we share that in common. What about you?
Jets and Yankees games I like to be by myself, but election nights with people. I might be either here in the building or somewhere nearby in New York.
Good. Well, it's going to be an interesting 3 weeks. In some ways, I've never run a marathon, but in some ways, I feel like this is your last 2 miles, which are the hardest part of the race, right? So they're in it, and we're just sitting here observing and pontificating. And I'm really fortunate to have people like you in my life. Thank you so much, Antoine, Seawright, and Matt Gorman.
Thank you, DP.
Okay,
Thanks,
take care.
Ann.
Listen ad-free with a Fox News Podcast Plus subscription on Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Prime members can listen to this show ad-free on the Amazon Music app.